Good morning, everyone. I'll be presenting our offering around fund administrator oversight. We've heard quite a lot over the last couple of days around the technology advances that we've seen with administrators and GPs and the way that data exchange is occurring between them. Before I do that, I wanted to provide a bit of background to Holland Mountain. For those of you that are not familiar with us as a firm, we offer services and solutions across various functions, and so really starting from strategic operational reviews, target operating model design, through to system selections, and then data services, specifically in the form of Atlas, which is our own data platform, and services that we provide around that. There are a number of user cases that we solve for. You'll see some of them up on the list here. Those will include systems integrations. We see that come up quite a lot, including fund administrator oversight, which I'll cover off today in the session. But also carry co-invest reporting specifically for GPs internally within your own firms. We see a lot of appetite within firms to create some more transparency around remuneration, carry value, and reporting that to all of the various participants. And then track record, which really is an extension to what we'll be discussing today around fund administrator oversight and how that works. So if you have any interest in any of those additional services, please feel free to reach out to any of the Holland Mountain team. We'll be here for the rest of the conference, so look forward to hearing from you. Specifically, when we talk about fund administrator oversight, I think what we're really referring to is the journey that we've seen and the evolution that we're seeing in the market around how GPs and firms are engaging with their administrators and essentially custodians of the data that they hold on their behalf. And so when we think about the in-house model, which was very much the norm when we go back 5 or 10 years ago, almost all firms 20 years ago certainly were managing a lot of the accounting in-house themselves. There has been a gradual transition over to more of an outsourced model with a view that there are going to be multiple benefits there for them through that model. Part of that's going to be outsourcing the regulatory and financial and fiduciary duties, but actually some of the efficiencies that many firms have hoped to gain through that, including cost, the operations, quality, haven't necessarily been realized. And I think that's where we see the evolution of the model as we move forwards, is how can we leverage the current model and evolve to something where we get a better outcome, and that's where we see fund administrator oversight. So not a complete revolution in the model, but more of an evolution to really maximize value from a GP's perspective, and really the value that fund administrators can offer to their clients. And you'll have seen a lot of that from both sides around what each of those areas and components within the infrastructure are really doing. However, I would say at the moment today, when we look at the market, more than 90% of firms shadow bookkeep in some shape, way or form. So that may well be in the form of Excel or a system, but there's a lot of duplication of effort that goes in because of some of the limitations in the current model that we see. And so when we think about how do we solve this problem and what are some of the challenges that you need to address and think about, really we think of them from a number of angles, and you see that from some of the services that we offer across firms. And the first one is really engaging with your administrators and ensuring that they're going to be prepared to be able to actually handle that data and send it back to you. And so John, my colleague here, actually has a particular product offering specifically focused on that engagement between GPs and administrators, and making sure that both parties are ready for that exchange of data that occurs and is going to be necessary. So before thinking about anything to do with technology, I think it's an appropriate conversation to be had and a readiness that needs to occur on both sides around what this will actually engage and the expectations that you can expect there. The transmission of data, I think there's been a tremendous amount of progress in this state when you look at that over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years with technology solutions, data platforms, warehouses that a lot of the administrators have been pushing within their own infrastructure and their own service offering. And that's really good. You need a way to be able to ingest that data. For the most part, I think technology enables that pretty easily nowadays, and that's not really a core differentiation point. But the question is once you've got that data in whatever format, and it could be an API, it could be a CSV file that you're exchanging, the question is how do you now, in a valid way, start to remove some of the manual steps that you have internally. So typically you'll be checking for allocations, you may be checking and validating NAVs, for example, and valuations and capital calls and distributions, and all of the various transactions that are occurring. Those are happening internally within the GP today, because they serve a function, it's a control process, it's a validation step that occurs. So how do you ensure that once that data lands, you still have the right tools in place to be able to address those common concerns? And that's where, from our perspective, and I'll go through this in a few moments around the slides, but we have the tools to be able to enable you to do that. The second area, once the data comes in, is the source data itself is perfect when you think about fund accounting data and all of the reports that you need, but it's not going to contain everything that you're going to need to service all your internal reporting requirements and your LP requirements. And without creating a complete second and duplicate copy of that data, how do you achieve it? And so data enrichment and enabling your business teams, and that might be the investment team, it might be the IR team, maybe somebody in operations, the ability to be able to update information real time and enrich the information that you're receiving from your admins. So you gain the efficiency on the data capture, but you also gain all of the efficiency around and controls around data input around that. The final piece is then any adjustments that need to be layered in. So for almost every project that I get engaged in, there are inevitably going to be some adjustments that your team are going to have to add in, and that may be for tax adjustments, it may be day counts, it may be payments on capital calls and distributions, that the way that you report to your LPs and you report internally is going to be slightly different from the way that the administrators capture that. So how do you layer those adjustments in a controlled manner with the appropriate permissions and the right lockdown of data for that to be valuable to the entire landscape? And so from our perspective, what we've done is taken several steps through each of those that process. One of those is integrating with all of the various service providers and systems that are out there today, so that we are able to leverage and pull data from each of these sources and quite often push data back into those various systems, so that you're able to manage and control that information, but also push it into downstream systems. A good example of that may be commitment data that you're pulling from your administrator. You want it to land in your Salesforce or Deal Cloud instance for your IR team. So, and that's where the tooling around the integration and managing that information is going to be ultimately really important. The next step is then thinking about data quality. So as you start to think about information that's coming into you, part of the challenge I mentioned earlier is really quality of service and quality of data that many clients are having to deal with. We've integrated that directly into the platform so you can start to understand the level of data and quality information that you're receiving from each of your various fund administrators and the sources of systems, and really start to quantify that. So this is an area that we've spent a significant amount of time, especially over the last couple of months, around pulling data together when it's coming in from a source system and understanding and being able to quantify the quality of that data and the information that we receive from there. Mastering of that data. So as you have this information being received from your administrators, more and more of our clients are engaging with multiple administrators, whether that's for various strategies or jurisdictional reasons, multiple funds. So the ability for you to be able to tie the individual investors together, the fund products, your investments across these various sources is a key component to any of the next steps that you may be looking to take. So tracking and mastering your data within the platform, irrespective of the fact that it's coming from your administrators, and then being able to enrich that data within the platform, allowing your end users, your business users to be able to run that from the platform as well. It's something that we see is going to be a key differentiation point through the progression of your data from admin to reports and outputs. I mentioned quality and control, and so within the Atlas platform, we've integrated a number of automated reconciliations. This might be against cash and your bank statements, for example. It may be NAV statements that you're tracking against valuations from your portfolio monitoring system. And on the fund-to-fund side, we see quite a lot with tools that we integrate with a lot. Canoe, one of our partners, being a good example of that. So having the right controls in place, the automated reconciliations and checks and balances with the fund admin data before it moves out and into the reporting platform that you might use to use for this. To give you an example of a client that we worked with not too long ago, where they had multiple administrators, they were pulling data from two different fund accounting systems. One was an eFront system, one Investran. A lot of that data exchange historically was done through spreadsheets where the data was being pulled through, sent via emails or perhaps via FTP. But the finance team were really then responsible for manipulating that data through Excel into lots of different outputs that they were using, both internally and externally when they were reporting to investors and LPs. And any information that the IR team wanted to leverage from that had to be a copy and paste into a separate set of spreadsheets and outputs that they were then managing. So lots of duplication. I think a model that we see an awful lot, and a common problem that firms are looking to try and solve for. And so through the use of Atlas with that particular client, we were able to, first of all, automate reconciliations to banks. So as fund accounting data was being fed in on a daily basis from the admins, we were able to reconcile that to their cash balances, manage exceptions and check allocations, but also book adjustments. So they had adjustments for opening balances that they wanted to load. There was also period adjustments that they wanted to track in order for all of the reporting that they needed. And by being able to track that through the front end of Atlas as opposed to directly into a database or through spreadsheets, they were able to control the input of that data, combine it with the fund admin information that they were looking for, and then push that into the various teams for reporting purposes in the form of Power BI reports specifically in many cases, but also feeding into quarterly reports and PowerPoint presentations that the teams were looking to use. So when we think about the change in model there for a lot of firms where shadow bookkeeping is going to be a key theme, what we see with the evolution of pulling the data directly from your admins, being able to apply the appropriate controls in place, really there are a number of benefits around efficiencies that you should be looking to achieve. Start to recognize some of the timeliness and improvements around quality of data, the timeliness of data, and improve reporting across the board. So with that, I wanted to leave you with a few highlights from some of the clients that we work with. If you have any questions, I'll be around after the seminar today. Feel free to reach out to myself or John or any of our team. I'd be delighted to take any questions. Thank you.